A famous curator once told me that people have created museums to hold the things they can't bear to throw away. Around the world, individuals, organizations, and governments have collected, conserved, and preserved those things that are special to us. Pictures, films, documents, and objects that help us remember our stories. The stories that sustain the identity of our communities, cities, regions, and nations. I was educated as a photographer, a filmmaker, so I've always had a special fascination with old films and photos. Photography captures history in a way that words can't. Photos are a virtual reality of history. We are in an era when everything is photographed, and so now we realize how rare and valuable historical photos are, how relatively few of them we have from before smartphones with cameras and cloud-based albums with trillions of photos. In 2016, I began working with the Chicago History Museum, which is one of the largest and oldest city history museums in the United States. Their archive contains over 23 million images, documents, and objects that tell Chicago stories. Our project mission was to connect the archive to the places and people in the present-day city. The work we did together serves as an example of the new ways we can create history experiences with new technology. These are photographs of Chicago, April 15, 1915. On that day, a major boating accident occurred on the Chicago River. It's an event that has a historic plaque at the site and is talked about in the tourist tours of the river. It happened right in the middle of downtown near the newspaper office and the downtown photo studio, so even though it was just one day in 1915, there are hundreds and hundreds of photographs. Our goal was to use those photos to create a virtual experience of that day in the place where it happened. We used the same augmented reality technology as Pokemon Go, which was also released in 2016, and published our own AR app to bring the historical archive to the site. We first researched the photo archive. When and where was the photographer standing, and where was he pointing? We looked for opportunities where particular places and moments were captured from multiple perspectives and in exceptional detail. And we considered the relationship to the present-day city. What things were still there 100 years later, like the river, the bridges, and historic buildings, things that could create powerful connections between the past and present. And then we let audiences see these connections from the exact same location today, all while telling the story of the event. For this research process, we had to think of the archive as a multi-dimensional object in which there is not just place and time and content captured, but also the author's pose and the relationship to the present-day location and extant structures. In that multi-dimensional archive, there are clusters of images that capture the historical space in a special way. Images captured from the same place or looking the same way or uniquely juxtaposing with the present day. And these clusters can be used to create virtual reality experiences of the past. Over the next 5 years with the Chicago History Museum, I produced multiple projects using special opportunities within this multi-dimensional archive. The 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre is a famous event in Chicago history. It was a gangland killing involving Al Capone, where the historic photographs of the aftermath were printed in newspapers across the country. But the site of the event was a garage that became a private parking lot. There's not even a historical plaque to note the location on the north side of the city. Those special tour buses will still pull up outside to see the blank spot. We matched the archive with the site and produced new VR photography of specific locations where photographers once stood. Because of the density of images, we were able to create immersive 360-degree views of the historical event. Not a recreation of the site in a 3D model, but a window into the history using the historical photographs. The experience was published as a VR app, VR videos, and stills. It was included in museum programming, bringing the real-world, present-day site into the museum. Together, the content was viewed over 1 million times, far surpassing the audience numbers of the City History Museum and won recognition by the American Alliance of Museums and the National Museum of Law Enforcement. We had used virtual reality technology for a specific purpose, one often associated with augmented reality or geolocated tours. We connected the present-day site with the site's past as captured in photos, connecting history to the present day and connecting the archive to the city. And the use of VR media technology had a second benefit. Audiences could experience the story from anywhere, making the content accessible and international to an extent that a traditional exhibit could never be.
In 1933, we paid maybe 7 cents to ride the elevated train to downtown, 50 cents to enter the fair. Another 25 cents would get us a ride on the Sky Ride.
Stroll along and stroll along your way. Make this a good world to live.
We used the same method for two much larger historical places, the sites of the two World's Fairs in Chicago that occurred in 1893 and 1933. Both locations are now city parks with almost no sign of the original fair buildings. In this case, the invisible places of history were not just events, but entire complexes of buildings, streets, bridges, and towers covering many square kilometers. Within the multi-dimensional archive, these buildings were not just featured as content, they were the locations where photographers stood to take their pictures. Both fairs contained some of the tallest structures in the country in those historic years, and not just buildings. The 1893 fair debuted the original 80-meter tall Ferris wheel, and the 1933 fair had a cable car ride with 191-meter towers. And from these heights, photographers had taken pictures that were in the archive. We used aerial VR drone photography to match the locations where photographers once stood high above the fairs. To frame the scores of photographs taken from the windows of the 1893 Ferris wheel, we recreated the wheel in 3D animation with historical accuracy and matched the rotation to a drone flight. Then historical photographs were projected into the windows to match the locations. In these projects, we discovered a third benefit to using VR for history experiences. Not only were we expanding audience and connecting places with the history, we were allowing people to visit sites that could no longer be accessed. The VR experiences could cover kilometers of territory, and it could transport viewers high into the air where they could no longer go. And these vertiginous views helped recreate the experience of people long ago riding higher in the air than they had ever been. I want to describe two more types of projects produced in Chicago before talking about the possibilities for productions here in Shanghai. Anniversaries are an occasion on which histories are recalled throughout media, in book publications, news stories, films, and events. They are also an opportunity to bring historical image archives to life and transport audiences into a virtual reality of their history. In 2018, on the 50th anniversary of the Chicago Democratic National Convention protests, a definitive history book on the subject was published by historian David Farber, and a fact-based film by writer and director Aaron Sorkin entered production. As well, oral histories of the events told by people that were there had been recorded by the Chicago History Museum. We collaborated with historians and authors to create a narrated virtual experience of the photo and film archive, and in addition created a web app through which people could explore the contents in greater depth, see their locations, and access historical documents, narratives, and images. A similar project is being produced this year on the 150th anniversary of the Great Chicago Fire. Using WebVR technology and in consultation with preeminent historian Carl Smith, we have produced a web app through which a 15-meter, 360-degree cyclorama painting of the fire can be explored. Like other productions, these experiences tell the historical stories, but the archive images are forefront, audiences can interactively explore, and the media emphasizes a connection with the present-day places in the city. Since photography transitioned from film to digital, archives have made an ongoing push to digitize photo archives. In addition, recent photographic history comes to the archive already in digital format. This has resulted in accessible archives containing millions of entries. In the case of just a single city history museum, Chicago's has over 23 million archive entries, including an entire century of photography from multiple city newspapers, as well as private collections like the archive of famous mid-century architectural photography from the Hedrick Blessing Studio. This presents a new challenge. Archives that are accessible but too big to exhibit or publish through conventional methods. In a series of projects, we processed the entire Hedrick Blessing photo archive, comprising almost 100,000 photographs, to be displayed on public screens. AI algorithms were used to stitch photographs together into continuous and surreal spaces, and then stitched across time into never-ending camera movements. The goal has been to publicly display an archive in its entirety, and somehow capture and present the enormous scale of the collection, so audiences can see not just a tiny selection, but the character of the whole. Put together, it is like creating an image of history itself. I think this concept is part of a trend of thinking of histories and archives as IP, and trying to distill from a collection too big to see all at once key elements and understandings, and then to use that as creative material. The Future Museum Studio was founded in 2021 at the Institute of Cultural and Creative Industry at Shanghai Jiao University. The research mission is to innovate new museum experiences through new media technologies, and specifically to bring these experiences to Shanghai audiences using archives of Shanghai photographic history. Shanghai presents unique opportunities and challenges for these types of productions. There are extensive archives of historic Shanghai photography and locations around the world. There is an international fascination and connection with this cosmopolitan city, and some of the city's features and buildings that are seen in early 1900s photography remain tourist attractions today. In this respect, the historic Bund is exceptional. There are multiple panoramic photos of the Bund going back to the 1880s. The changes to this part of Shanghai over the course of 140 years have been documented and archived to an exceptional degree. As well, major historic streets and architecture featured in postcards a century ago are still photo attractions today for contemporary photographers. We are now researching and documenting the IP of the four-dimensional Shanghai, identifying archives and locations that have been captured with exceptional detail by photographers across history. A project currently in development uses the exceptional panoramas of the Bund produced by the Gong Tai photo studio starting in the 1880s. Imagine a visitor to the Bund, able to open up an app and see their exact location but in 1882 or 1927. discover historic images of the streets around them, and hear the stories of those who have lived and worked in these locations and seen the Shanghai changes through periods of enormous growth. These types of experiences can be combined with the historic walking tours and exhibits of Shanghai neighborhood history that have become so popular. In China, archives and objects of ancient history have a special role in the national identity. Early photography from the late 1800s to the first half of the 1900s is only beginning to have a special role in the identity of the city and its urban neighborhoods. In a city like Chicago, the beginning of the 1900s were the decades of enormous growth, when everything was built and changed. Here, it is the decades of this century. So there is the possibility, too, that it is these decades, the ones we can still remember, that will be the subject and material of future history experiences, the years when everything was built and changed. As part of that thinking, we are creating a four-dimensional catalog of contemporary Shanghai and working with partners to crowdsource images of nearer history. The quick changes in media publishing over the last few decades has taught us that our media forms can change suddenly. Think of printed encyclopedias or physical photo albums. The future museum studio is looking towards the next shift in how we actively see, experience, and interact with the historical archive. Thank you.